Hey, it is day 22 of a series I'm doing where I'm inviting you to read Acts with me in the month of February. And if this is the first video you're seeing, what this series looks like is since Acts is 28 chapters and February is 28 days, each day in February we're reading one chapter of Acts, and each day I post a video sharing what I liked and what stood out to me about the chapter for that day. And if you're reading Acts with me, I'd love for you to share what you like too in the comments. And in this way, it's been like our own Bible study in the month of February, to help build and keep a daily Bible habit. So if you want to join in reading Acts even just for this last week, I would love that. Today is February 22nd, so that means we read chapter 22 of Acts today. This is what I liked and what stood out to me today when reading. At the end of chapter 21 yesterday, Paul was in the temple at Jerusalem, when suddenly people realized who he was and realized that he was there. A whole crowd was stirred up against him, and they brought him out of the city and were trying to kill him. But when the Roman soldiers saw this riot, they came and broke it up, and they arrested Paul. And in this chapter, Paul is given the opportunity to speak to the crowd. He tells the story of how he was originally saved, how Jesus showed up to him on the road to Damascus, how he was blinded for a time, and how God sent Ananias to him to restore his sight and to confirm the word of God to him, which was that Paul was now going to be a witness for Jesus. Soon after this, God spoke to Paul that his ministry wasn't supposed to be in Jerusalem, but rather that God was sending him to the Gentiles. And the reason for this is what God said to him in verse 18. "Quick," he said, "leave Jerusalem immediately, because the people here will not accept your testimony about me." And in verse 21, God says, "Go, I will send you far away to the Gentiles." And after Paul had finished giving his testimony, they raised their voices and shouted, "Rid the earth of him, he's not fit to live." And Paul had to be taken away. And what stood out to me is that was exactly what God said would happen coming true, as God said to Paul soon after he told him, concerning the people in Jerusalem. "The people here will not accept your testimony about me." And in this chapter, Paul gives his testimony, and they do not accept it. And I'm sure Paul remembered these words, when in the last couple chapters, God had called him to go to Jerusalem. But it was also prophesied that he would have to endure suffering there. And what also stood out to me about this chapter is how in yesterday's chapter, whenever Paul is going to Jerusalem, he says he's prepared to suffer and even die for the Lord. But while Paul did have to go through some suffering, God's hand was still there to save him from it each time. As we saw at the end of yesterday's chapter, where Paul was taken out of the city by the crowd, and they were beating him and trying to kill him. But then the Roman soldiers came, and the people stopped, and Paul was taken away. And so in that instance, Paul did have to suffer, but God saved him from death. And in the chapter today, God saves Paul from having to suffer, because after he had made his speech and was taken away from the people, it was directed that Paul was to be flogged. I looked up what being flogged was, and being flogged was being whipped or beaten with a rod. Definitely not something you want to have to go through. But as this is about to happen, Paul remembers that he is a Roman citizen, and he asks them, "Is it legal for you to flog a Roman citizen who hasn't even been found guilty?" And when they heard that he was a Roman citizen, they were alarmed. And it says in verse 29, those who were about to interrogate him withdrew immediately, and God saved Paul from having to go through this. And so that is what stood out to me today about chapter 22, is seeing these things that God had said to Paul come true, and also seeing God's hand to save Paul in it. If you read chapter 22 today, I'd love to know what you liked and what stood out to you. Let me know in the comments. And if you want to join in reading Acts for this last week of February, that would be awesome. I'd love for you to join if you want. Thanks so much for joining me for day 22 today. Come back tomorrow for day 23, where we'll look at chapter 23 of Acts.